This is the Middle-earth philosopher, where I take a look at ideas, people, and relationships within Middle-earth and try to examine them from a philosophical point of view that would have existed in that universe. The last video I did was on Hurin, who was considered the greatest human warrior to have ever existed in Middle-earth. And this time I want to do a video on the philosophies of his wife, Morwen, because it is a very interesting and yet at the same time extreme contrast to that of Hurin. And not only that, I think she shares a unique place among that family as well, which I'll get into later. So some background here. Morwen comes from the land of Dorthonion, which was in the central northern part of Beleriand and practically on the doorstep of Angband, however you want to do distance with that. And she was of the same noble house as that of Baron, who was actually a cousin of hers. So she was there during the War of the Battle of Seven Flame, where basically Morgoth, who just kind of got sick of all the beauty and was seen in all the setbacks that his armies were having, just launches a sudden all-out assault on everybody around him, and he overruns Dorthonion. In fact, Dorthonion was the first to fall, along with the Elven allies who they were allied with at that time, which were the brothers of Galadriel, actually. Now, the war didn't stop when the main armies were defeated, because the survivors formed guerrilla armies and cells and were fighting still against Morgoth's occupation. And it was hard living, it was hard survival. And most of her relatives end up getting killed, and they're just being killed off, to the point where they came to the conclusion that the surviving women and children had to leave. They had to go west to Dor-lómin, which was still, as far as they knew, under control of the elves. And a lot of this was done against the will of the refugees who were sent out. It's entirely possible that the women and children were fighting too during that time. It was that bad. But leave they do. And, again, if you talk to any refugee who's leaving their home and is trying to migrate, that's hard. Okay? And this is like Middle Ages type lifestyle. So, put that on top of just hard leaving your home and you're surviving your relatives, knowing that anyone who stays, you're never going to see again. And I think this is what shapes Morwen's personality going forward, and that makes her who she is, and how it does also affect her children as well in terms of what she passes down to them. Now, she does end up marrying Hurin, and things seem fine at first for the most part, but it's a marriage of contrast, of yin and yang. Hurin is this optimistic but warlike person who has hope that the elves are going to redeem everything and ultimately defeat Morgoth. And Morwen is just very pragmatic and cynical about it and does not think it's going to happen. A lot of those views which she keeps to herself, though at times she does express elements of them to her husband. All this leads up to, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, where essentially turns out to be the last stand of the Beleriand alliance against Morgoth to finally defeat him and take the Silmarils back, and ultimately fails, and Hurin never comes back from that war and is presumed by most people for decades to be dead. And Morwen, having again lost loved ones and everything, this time steadfastly refuses to leave Dor-lómin. She will not have it, even though everyone's kind of saying that she needs to leave, because it's being occupied by Easterlings who had allied with Morgoth during that time. And for a while she does stay, and the excuse that she kind of uses is that, she's pregnant with her third child, Nienor. But in reality, she just didn't want to leave the home that she shared with her husband, because she did love him. But she is eventually forced to leave, and she migrates to Doriath, because she had sent her son there, Hurin, some years ago, and had been in constant communication with him, or at least been trying to, and now is trying to reunite what's left of her family. But even though she gets there and they arrive and they're treated with respect and honor, thanks to Hurin's reputation and everything, so to speak, things eventually fall apart because Hurin's not back yet, and she needs to go up and find him. So she leaves, and she, demands that her daughter stay behind, but like mother, like daughter, and father, Leonor doesn't listen, and she follows after them, and it leads to this whole kind of catastrophe where, while they're lost at some point, they are separated from their elven escorts by the dragon Glaurung. And from that point on, Morwen never sees any of her children again, and it's tragic and it's sad, and she just kind of disappears for a very long time until Hurin finds her decades later, and they're both old at this point, and she is by the tombstone that was put up by the Haladin for their children who had died. And she dies in peace, so to speak, even though she is left wondering how Hurin found his sister, which Hurin knows how, but doesn't have the heart to tell her, understandably. But for the most part, it's rather peaceful. And there's an irony in this, in that she is the only one of that family to die peacefully. The only one. So this gets into, again, what was Morwen's worldview, and how did that affect everything, and why was she that way, and how did that manifest in her choices? Well, I think to begin with, if you want a base idea of what Morwen was like, then look at Galadriel, but picture her being a lot more reserved and a lot more hostile to people that she doesn't know. That's Morwen. She was tall, she was beautiful, considered the most beautiful woman there, and she also was intimidating. She was often very cold and very silent. She was highly introverted, but when she spoke with a bluntness. She was not tactical about how she spoke, and a lot of people thought that she was cold-hearted. But it wasn't that she was cold-hearted or didn't feel anything. It's just that her life experience had buried, or required her to bury, a lot of those empathetic and more warm, extroverted feelings towards other people, even her family. And she shows this. Again, she does not leave Dorloman when everyone's telling her to leave after, the Easterlings come to occupy the land, and they're trying to marry their men to the Dorloman women, which I don't want to think about what that includes. I think that in Morwen's mind, being emotionally vulnerable and open leaves you open to hurt and suffering, and decreases your chances of survival. Because I think Morwen's a survivalist. Again, she's a refugee from war, and from her lands taken and devastated, and her people and killed and everything. So she has that mentality of, what can I do to increase my survival and the survival of those who I care about? When Morwen does show other emotions, more open emotions, it's very private. And it's usually only to Hurin. So, for example, when her second child, Lilith, dies of illness, actually, she grieves in private over that loss, but she never shows that to anyone else. And that's something that Hurin picks up on very well. And then when she is confronting the royalty of Doriath about, what happened to Hurin, as well as when she goes out to find him, even against their recommendation. There are these clear displays that she does care, she does love them. It's just, short of something extreme happening, she doesn't always show it, unfortunately. And the face that she does show, as I said earlier, is of one who's cold, tall, and intimidating. And is so intimidating that the Easterlings will not lay a finger on her. She's a witch, I think that they think that she is. And they stay away from her and her kids. And that actually helps them, in the beginning, because that ensures some kind of safety, so to speak, for her kids. And, if they're going to think that bad things are going to happen to them if they fuck with her. So that was one positive aspect of that outlook, and almost a justification of it as well. And as I mentioned earlier, she has tried to convey some pragmatic sense to her husband while he was still around, when he was around. She didn't have faith in the victory over Morgoth because she had seen the strength of his armies. And she had seen the strength of the elves and of men, and they couldn't stand up to them. So rightly or wrongly, she had concluded that, there's no chance. They can't win. And even though she didn't quite go that far with Hurin, it was enough, I think, that Hurin kind of picked up on it, and he just could not be swayed because they're both stubborn in their own ways. Again, it's yin and yang. They have an interesting marriage, I guess you could say, because of that extreme contrast, and yet they still stayed together as much as they did, and they loved each other and stuff like that. But yes, Morwen was just as stubborn, possibly more stubborn, more hard-willed, and more mule-headed than Hurin was. You can make that argument. Now, all this sounds very negative and about Morwen, but the reality is that this strong will is what allows her to be the only member of that family to die relatively peacefully, because everyone else, except her second child, Lilith, commits suicide. As soon as they lose that hope, that faith that they believed in, whatever that was, they all kill themselves. And it's a very sharp contrast that Morwen herself, the one who does not, I guess you could say, have any faith, or has very little of it at the very least, is almost basically the last one standing, or the last one who, didn't kill themselves. And that says a lot about the debate about whether she made the right choices with her personality or not. Because if she had been more hopeful, like her husband and Turin and Naenor, and all this happened, would she have committed suicide too? I don't know. And again, in fact, if Dorthinion had not fallen during the Battle of Sudden Flame, would her personality be different? What kind of woman would she have been then, right? Again, I don't know, and it's a very interesting question, given how extreme of a personality that she becomes. But you can ultimately say that she did what she could with what she had, and she tried to pass down that knowledge. Ultimately, a lot of it unsuccessful, unfortunately, but she did what she could. And you can literally say that her motto, her personal motto or her family motto, was by hell or by high water. That was Morwen.